You're listening to The Stall and Stable Show, ideas for happy horsekeeping.
This is it, listeners. My final episode of The Stall and Stable Show. You know, there's nothing like wrapping up a big part of your life to find out exactly how impactful that part of your life has been. To everyone who's messaged me, emailed me, called me, or just posted a comment to say how much The Stall and Stable Show has meant to them, I am so grateful for that. It's hard sometimes when you're broadcasting, it's just me talking into the abyss many times. Even when I have a guest, you just never know who's out there listening and what the conversation means to them. The best I was able to do is to have a conversation that was meaningful, helpful, and authentic. And I think I did that. I hope I did that. But it's not enough in my world. And what I wanted to do in this last episode, we've got two things. I wanted to say thank you, goodbye, and explain why I made the decision to move on from this chapter in my career, in my life. And the best way I thought to do that was to share with you the personal statement that I had to write as part of my application to Penn Vet. It took me a long time to write it because there's so many factors that went into my decision to apply to this program. So I'm going to share that with you. And then afterwards, hopefully you'll have a better idea of how I got to this place, how you got to this place with me. And then we're going to wrap up this final episode with a conversation with Stacey Anderson from Triple Crown Nutrition. But before we dive into the meat of the episode, I want to say thank you to American Stalls for being my longest running sponsor and a company that truly embodies outstanding quality and service. American Stalls appeals to a luxury market because they do not compromise on quality. Because horses cannot function. They cannot function happily, they cannot function well, and neither can you in a substandard environment. So whether you're looking to remodel your existing barn or build from scratch, call them early on in the process. Not only will they guide you through what you need to keep in mind when you're building, but they will bend over backwards to make their products meet your needs. And in case you need reminding, you can find them online at americanstalls.com. Up next, a sneak peek into my Penn Vet application essay. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one heart the aching, or cool one pain, or help the fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. Emily Dickinson. When I was a very young child, this poem was framed and hung on the wall of my bedroom. It was put there by my mother, who had a special relationship with empathy because of her own troubled childhood. She wanted me to grow up understanding that to consider others and their untold stories was important, and through empathy would grow purpose and perhaps even change. I, on the other hand, simply adored the fat and fluffy robin whose image was next to the words I could not yet read. As I grew, the poem remained on my bedroom wall, and when we moved, the poem moved with us. I eventually learned the meaning of the poem and quickly associated it with my inherent affinity for animals. Cats, dogs, goats, horses, turtles, you name it, I was mesmerized by it. For me, the desire to spend time with them never diminished. As I matured and did grown-up things like raise a family and build a career, I came to realize that I wanted more than just to be around animals. I wanted to understand them. I wanted to know what motivates them, what makes them anxious, what relaxes them, and why they so often get along with humans. The older I got, the more powerful this question became. And the more I came to understand the complexities of human beings, the more I wanted to know why animals, horses in particular, would cooperate with all of the zany things we asked of them. As a podcast host and producer, I've spent years talking about best practices in horsekeeping from an environmental perspective. Things like barn design, fencing, and pasture management. The conversations I was having with experts and lay people alike kept coming back to the central theme of how the choices we make on behalf of our horses must include taking the horse's needs into consideration. Otherwise, we would forever be working against their nature. About 12 years ago, I was introduced to Shauna Karish, a former marine mammal trainer who was using positive reinforcement methods with competitive horses. At the time, clicker training was still a novel concept to horse people and frowned upon by most horse professionals. Even I admit to having been skeptical about the use of a clicker for training a 1,200-pound flight animal. Through Shauna's teaching, however, I discovered the power and joy of positive reinforcement. Of course, R+, as we call it, is only one aspect of operant conditioning, but it was enough to inspire me to dive deeper into the 4 quadrants of training. My undergraduate work in environmental studies was supposed to lead me to a career in wildlife management. The coursework in biology and environmental sciences was very interesting to me, even when the material was challenging. Looking back on my education and knowing what I know now, I'm proud of myself for having had the fortitude to stick with classes that were often overwhelming and sometimes boring. You see, at the age of 50, I was diagnosed with ADHD, hyperactive. Like so many adults who are diagnosed with this condition later in life, the history of who I was as a person and a student became clear. To be so interested in animals, biology, and psychology, yet not able to sustain the attention needed to be a good student in those subjects, was a complete mystery to me, until my diagnosis. Now, I could explain here how I ended up in software sales and marketing, but something tells me you don't need that explanation. What's important is that during the early stages of my marketing career, I learned about the importance of understanding my audience, shaping a message to appeal to that audience, and then crafting the words or pictures that could influence my audience's perception of a topic. I became a master communicator. As life paths sometimes do, my long-held passion for animals and my skills as a communications specialist converged when I found myself unexpectedly responsible for training 2 off-track thoroughbred mares during the pandemic. I'm a lifelong horse enthusiast, but not a professional equestrian. So, with little professional assistance at the time, I had to search for training methods that were effective while also safe for the handler. I tried all of the traditional equine training methods and quickly discarded anything that didn't feel fair or compassionate to the horse. And that led me back to clicker training. I became an earnest student of R+, and was surprised to find that I was able to sustain my attention to the material for record-breaking amounts of time, even when things got very technical or complicated. How is this different than my first attempt at higher education? This time, I had the benefit of self-knowledge, the wisdom that comes with maturity, the motivation for survival, we're talking off-track mares here, and last but not least, medication for ADHD. The more I dove into R+, operant conditioning, and the nature of horses, the more I wanted to know. Because I found that the more I understood horses, the better able I was to help that fainting robin back into his nest. I came to understand that the pain of horses who are subjected to unnecessary stress or even cruelty could be cooled with kinder training strategies. I discovered that it was possible to have cooperation without dominance. And the more I worked with R+, the more inspired I became to learn about the science behind it. But the training is just a small part of that inspiration. Circling way back to that poem on my wall, the connection between helping animals live better lives by understanding them is what brings me before you today. My own experience as an unrecognized neurodivergent meant years of unnecessary struggle and suffering. Once I understood my own brain and behaviors, I found comfort, success, and happiness that I never thought possible. So one day, while mucking stalls, of course, I had a revelation. What if all of those uncomfortable, traditional training techniques we're working counter to a horse's brain. What if, like me, understanding the inner workings of a horse's mind led to kinder and more effective training? And what if kinder training methods led to happier horses? Fast forward to this admission application and the leap of faith I'm about to take. With the double-edged sword that is the internet and social media, I realized that in order for my voice to rise above the din of thousands of self-proclaimed experts, I need to be sure that my voice is empowered with real and current knowledge. My professional goal is to shift away from being the moderator of conversations to being the behavioral expert in them. I'd like to continue to educate and inform people about the inner workings of animals, to work directly with horses and their handlers to use kinder training methods, and to spread the word about how and why it is so important to do so. If I'm going to leverage my skills as a communicator in the world of animal welfare, I need to combine the science of animal behavior, the artistry of shaping that behavior, and the ability to craft a message of compassion that people will come to value as a critical component of their lives with animals. Well, I hope that explains things a little bit for you. And again, I want to say thank you for joining me on this journey. If you were around way back in the days of the Talking Equine Show, Stable Scoop, Tack and Habit, and of course, Stall and Stable, thank you so much. Before we get on to part 2 of this episode, I want to thank from the bottom of my heart Martha and Rebecca at Trafalgar Square Books. These 2 incredible women have introduced me to countless horse professionals of the kind who have the horse's best interest at heart. And through my partnership with Trafalgar Square, my life has changed for the better. So thank you, Martha and Rebecca, from the bottom of my heart for sending me that first box of wonderful books. And now for the second half of this episode, one of my favorite parts of podcasting. This was getting to learn a lot more about equine nutrition and doing that with the team at Triple Crown Nutrition, especially Stacy Anderson. So let's welcome Stacy back to this final episode and get the last of our listener questions answered. Welcome back, Stacy. This is our final conversation. Well, no, it's our final podcast episode, but I'm sure it won't be our final conversation about horse nutrition.
Oh, well, thanks for having me back. I'm sad to hear that you're taking a break from the podcast to focus on your studies, but it's going to be awesome for you. So you'll be an even bigger resource once you're all done and through this. So that's awesome.
That's my hope. That is definitely my hope. But we're going to talk about a couple of questions that we pulled from our listener archive. But one of them came up more recently, and we're just going to go through them today. And I'll start with the very first one. And the first one is about alfalfa hay, which seems to be a popular choice among owners of active horses or sport horses. I always thought that alfalfa was kind of a luxury part of the horse's forage. You know, you fed it for a specific reason. But since moving to the Southeast, everybody feeds alfalfa here, like all the time. Can you talk to us about the benefits of alfalfa and why we might consider adding more of it to our horse's diet, whether it's in its long stem form or in the form of feed or pellets?
Absolutely. So alfalfa can be a great addition for many horses' diets. Alfalfa tends to be higher in calorie than grass hays. So that's one benefit for hard keepers and growing horses to incorporate some alfalfa in their diet because it can help with, reaching your calorie needs for those horses. Alfalfa also, because of its high calcium content, is really beneficial to help prevent and heal gastric ulcers because the calcium acts as a natural like Tums or antacid, kind of like how we eat for us. So for horses with ulcers, adding alfalfa to the diet is a fantastic thing. Even utilizing alfalfa for horses with metabolic concerns can be beneficial because oftentimes alfalfa actually is lower in non-structural carbohydrates than grass hays. The place where you need to be careful of with alfalfa for metabolic horses is if those are horses that are trending towards being overweight because
Of the
alfalfa
calories.
is high in calorie. So yeah, I do like to incorporate alfalfa into diets. I usually for many, many horses, I like, even 50 or more percent of the diet to be alfalfa. Just because it's high calorie, great quality forage. Horses generally like the taste of it, and it helps to buffer their digestive system. So for most horses, it's a great option.
So, other than metabolic horses, can you think of a reason why somebody wouldn't include alfalfa in their horse's food program?
So another area where you may not want to incorporate alfalfa at all or very much is for horses that are growing, because young horses, as they are growing, if they grow too quickly, which alfalfa, because it's high protein and high calorie, you don't want them to grow too quickly where they might have developmental issues with their bones and joints and things like that. So
Okay.
for growing horses, you may want to limit or not use alfalfa if they've been diagnosed with like an OCD or something like that.
Okay. And that's a conversation to have with your veterinarian. They can steer you in the right direction. Okay. So basically, for most of us, yeah, alfalfa is pretty good. It's let's include that in our horse's diet. But it also makes sense because it is a high protein forage that, especially for sport horses and working horses who need good muscle tone, that it's great for that.
Absolutely. And there are folks that feed 100% alfalfa. The horses do totally fine. I
Yeah.
generally wouldn't recommend it, but for many horses, it seems to work.
Where did the old myth come from that alfalfa made horses hot?
Ah, yes. So, there's generally not a reason that alfalfa should make horses hot because it is low in non-structural carbohydrates. I wonder if that comes from horses that were calorie deficient on like poor quality grass hays, and then they added alfalfa. The horses were no longer calorie deficient anymore. They felt better, so that made them kind of hot. I still have some customers to this day that they say even just adding a little bit of alfalfa, they feel that it makes their horses kind of amped up. It could be just because they really get excited about the taste of it and something
Yeah.
different. But yeah, the science is out as to why it would.
Well, there's so many, even just as I transition into grad school, understanding what different variables may impact a horse's response to a particular stimulus, even if that stimulus is food. Are they excited about the food? Because my horses love alfalfa. You mean, it's like having a filet mignon versus oatmeal. But also, what you can say, well, was it actually the alfalfa that made the horse hot? Or, like you said, are they feeling good, but they're kept in a stall for 22 hours a day? What happens when you're feeling good? You don't want to stand around in that box. So who knows really what the other variables were that contributed to a horse's up energy. It was more than likely not the alfalfa alone.
Absolutely. And if
Okay.
we think about it, if for those of you who have dieted and you know how you felt in calorie deficit, you
Yeah.
didn't feel like clicking your heels and running. And then you have like a good meal, you feel a little better after, you have a little more energy after that. So I think that's oftentimes the reason that folks think that alfalfa made their horses a little sparky. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you guys incorporate alfalfa into some of your feed products. Which feed products might we find alfalfa in and in what form?
So we use alfalfa in a lot of our textured feeds because alfalfa meal is a really great super fiber for horses. So Triple Crown Senior, Senior Gold, Triple Crown Complete, all of those products do have some alfalfa meal in them. Of course, when you're looking at a feed, an ingredient like that is, for some feeds is going to be a primary ingredient. And for other feeds like certain lower carb pellets and things like that, it would be more of a minor ingredient in those.
Yeah.
But yeah, alfalfa can be in a complete feed or in a feed can be a great addition for a horse as well for calories and good quality fiber as well.
So you said the word, and I'm glad that you did because I was about to go there. Complete feed. And I think the only time I had ever heard of a complete feed for horses was when my veterinarian was talking to me about a senior horse whose grinding surface of his teeth was no longer useful. So we had to put him on a complete feed so he could really get all of the nutrients that he needed. So this is, again, it's a little detour, but tell our listeners what is meant by a complete feed and why it's valuable.
Absolutely. So a complete feed is a feed that is formulated so that it could replace some or all of the horse's fiber requirement. So feeds like our senior feeds, our Triple Crown Complete, they can be used as the complete diet for a horse for horses that may have really poor teeth. There are horses that have some weird like digestive issues and esophageal issues where they can't chew long stem hay, so they have to be on complete feeds. And so for horses like that, typical 1,000-pound horse, they could eat 12 to 15 pounds a day of a complete feed if they can't eat fiber. Or, as horses age, they may still be able to eat their hay, but they go from being able to eat, 2 pounds of forage an hour to where they're kind of manipulating the hay around and moving the stalky stuff out of the way. And maybe they're only getting a half a pound of hay an hour now as they age, even though you're doing everything right for their teeth. It's just they're aging.
Yeah.
And so for those horses, we can help supplement them with a complete feed to help complement the hay that they are able to still get in.
So, okay, alfalfa. And then, of course, there's pellets, there's cubes. I will say, based on my own experience, I like to feed a concentrated alfalfa, again, in like a cube form or a pelleted form, but I always make sure that I soak it. Now, that's my personal preference, but it doesn't always need to be soaked. But I like to do that because it's just sort of a colic prevention thing, because not all concentrated feeds, whether it's a complete feed or pellets and cubes, not all of it soaks all the way through. Some things they only soak well in warm water. Some you have to soak for 10 minutes. Others you have to soak for 2 hours. So I like to make sure that I soak everything just so that there isn't really dry, compacted forage that's sitting in my horse's gut, especially on hot days when they might be sweating out whatever moisture could otherwise be going to digesting this forage. So you're nodding in agreement, like, yep, that's a good plan.
Absolutely. So if you are in a position where you can feed a soaked meal or mash, and if alfalfa is part of that, I find that a soaked meal is a huge help in preventing colics, because a lot of colics are caused by dehydration.
Yeah.
So it's an excellent choice. But there are plenty of horses out there that eat dry alfalfa pellets and even dry alfalfa cubes or other hay cubes. As long as they have good teeth, they're not known to be bolters of feed, so they're not like aggressive with eating.
Yeah.
Generally, I recommend feeding at ground level from a pan or bucket at the ground, especially if you're going to feed these products dry. But yeah, lots of healthy, good young horses eat dry cubes and do perfectly well.
Good. And if you're not sure, talk to your veterinarian or your equine dentist. Have a look inside your horse's mouth. I mean, that's something I think we don't talk about enough when we're talking about nutrition and I'm kind of guilty of this, like, oh, right, my horses need a dental exam. I forgot. As well trained as my horses are, it's possible for me to stick my hand in there and have one of them catch me with a sharp tooth by accident or something. So you have to be really careful about putting your hands in your horse's mouth. But the state of your horse's mouth can really impact how much they get out of their chewing experience and whether they're chewing complete feeds or forage. So it is an important thing to remember to do, to put that on your schedule.
Absolutely. And those regular dental exams can save you a lot of money in the long run. Whenever you're not having to, they're able to eat hay normally instead of losing a bunch of weight and then having to try to make up those calories later. So yes, oftentimes you'll find you'll actually save money if you get the dentals done. Yeah.
This is my new goal. Okay, here's what we should be doing. Even though it's that we should be doing it because it's in the best interest of the horse. But let me tell you how much money it's going to save you down the road. That's what gets people listening, Is it going to save them time or is it going to save them money?
All of the above when it comes to dentals, right? Yes.
And heartache. Who wants stress and heartache? So those three things, that's like the panacea of horse people. Save me time, save me money, and save me stress.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the next question. This comes up a lot, but this just came up the other day. What recommendations do you have for a horse who's in a career transition, for example, an off-track thoroughbred who may be moving into show hunters, and they're taking a little bit of time in between those careers, and that horse is underweight? Now, I know that we first look for signs of a medical reason, like ulcers, But once our horse is cleared, what kind of forage and feed combination would you recommend to best help a horse gain a healthy weight or get to a healthy weight?
So, forage first. That's what we
Yep.
always preach. That's what the horse's brain needs. That's generally what their body needs. So, we recommend a good quality forage. It really doesn't matter if you choose grass hay or an alfalfa blend. Something like an off the track thoroughbred, though, that's underweight, I do generally recommend adding alfalfa to that horse's diet
Mm,
because of the gastric buffering to help with any ulcers and because of the higher calorie. So, for an off the track thoroughbred that you're rehabbing, if you can add some alfalfa, that's fantastic. Whether it's hay, cubes, pellets, great.
yeah.
But we want to make sure that horse is getting at least 1.5% of its body weight in intake per day of forage, so hay, pasture, etc. Closer to 2% of body weight, or even 2.5% of body weight if they're underweight, is kind of where you want to be. And then oftentimes for these horses, even if they aren't a senior horse, I will recommend a senior feed, especially from Triple Crown's line, because our senior feeds are lower in carbohydrate than like our complete or Perform Gold feeds. So they're lower in carbohydrates. They're a little more gentle on the digestive system, but they provide really good amount of calories to help these horses get back to good weight. And if you're trying to gain weight, so generally you would be feeding enough of like one of the senior feeds that you wouldn't need a balancer.
Yep.
But these horses, if they come from the track and they're a little underweight, and then you get them back up to good weight, they may be horses, depending on your forage and your activity level, they may be horses that don't need 6 pounds a day of feed anymore at some, once you get them sort of back into weight for what you're doing. At that point, feed a little less feed in a ration balancer if you're not feeding, the recommended rate of feed at that time.
And what about natural grasses, pasture grasses? Like we've got, we've got Timothy, we've got Orchard, we've got Bermuda, we've got down here, we've got Bahia. Any of these grasses tend to put weight on a horse more so than another?
Oh, that's a tough question. So it as I say a lot of times, it depends,
Oh
right?
my
So
God, I'll
it,
never get tired of hearing that.
it depends upon the growing seasons. How was the weather in your area that year? Did you get enough rain? Was it stressed and dry? Those things make huge impacts on our forage. And with our forage in the pasture, that can change within 2 weeks, right? I mean, we can have dry,
True.
crunchy hay, dry, crunchy pasture and have a nice rain, and 2 weeks later, it's lush and green and beautiful. And oddly enough, sometimes you look out there and the lush, green, beautiful grass is actually lower in carbohydrates than the dry, crunchy grass that was stressed and was like doing everything that it could to like pull in sugars so that it could grow. So
Aha.
if you have a horse that is metabolic and you're having trouble controlling the symptoms of those issues, it's really important to test your forages and know what's going on. For other horses that are that don't have those issues, forage is great. And then just supplementing with a ration balancer or the amount of feed necessary to keep them at a good body condition is what we can do, because grass and hay, a lot of the work in that is mother nature, right?
Yeah.
So it is, we don't have a lot of control, the growers don't have a lot of control, horse owners don't have a lot of control unless you're growing your hay yourself. So do the best you can. And if you have a horse that's really, really sensitive, test it and know what's happening. But for the general horse, just making sure they're getting enough good quality fiber and maintaining a good weight and getting proper vitamin mineral is what you need to do.
Yeah. Feeding to weight, we've talked about this in previous episodes. Sometimes you don't really know if your horse is getting enough except by keeping track of their weight.
Yep.
Okay. And then the last question. This is more of the inside scoop from Stacy, who deals with this stuff all the time. This is tapping into the vault of horsewoman's secrets. What would you suggest as a DIY kitchen ingredient that all horse owners should keep on hand, and for what reason?
So I think it's really helpful to have a scale. I know. So maybe this isn't a kitchen ingredient necessarily, because for your horses, you might need to weigh a little more than your typical kitchen scale would. I really like the digital luggage scales. You can grab them at Walmart or Target. But especially if you have a horse that is underweight or a horse that is overweight. Having a scale so that you can know exactly how much forage and feed you are providing is huge for addressing that concern. So, yeah, if you can keep a scale at the barn, that would be my number one. Yeah. And I know not all of us are going to use it all the time. And I get that. Like we're, busy people and you just need to get the horse fed and cared for. But when you're having a problem, knowing exactly what you're feeding, address it so that you can get on top of it and make sure things don't get worse.
I use my scale at least 4 times a year or whenever I get a new load of hay in, because hay, depending on what you get, it will weigh differently. And so I like to make sure that with a particular load, 3 or 4 flakes equals 15 pounds. Great. New load comes in, 3 or 4 flakes might equal 10 pounds. So I think it's really important to keep one on hand. You don't have to use it every single day. But once you get an idea of how much particular flake weighs, or, I put my hay in the wintertime anyway, I put it in hay nets and I just hang that hay net right on the scale and it tells me what I need to know. I will say one of the things that made me fall in love with Triple Crown, this might have been like the thing that said, I want to marry you. And I don't know where it came from. I must have bought a bunch of bags of feed, and I got a feed cup, a serving cup. And on that cup, it told me how many pounds of each type of feed a scoop was. And because we really, really need to feed our horses by weight, our recommended daily feeding is 2 pounds, 4 pounds, 6 pounds. And every scoop is different. So how do you can weigh your feed. Yep. You can put it on a kitchen scale and say a half a scoop of Triple Crown Senior weighs 2 pounds. That's great. But you have to remember that. Your staff has to remember that. These scoop cups that you guys made are brilliant. They make my life easier. And so thank you keep doing that. So I think that keeping weight in your mind when it comes to feeding your horses is important, and a scale and a feed cup that measures different feed products by weight is really, really important to have in your feed room.
Yes, having an accurate knowledge of how much you're feeding, especially if a problem pops up with your horse's weight or something like that, is huge. Like I'll have folks call me and I'll say, how much, my horse is underweight. How much are you feeding? 2 scoops. Well, what size is your scoop?
Right.
So we have to figure that out.
How many times a day do you say, what size is your scoop? And veterinarians too, if you're trying to describe a problem to your veterinarian, they're going to ask you, how much is your horse getting? They talk about things in terms of weight. So you're going to need to know that conversion. All right. I think we covered it all. I hate to say this, but thank you so much for joining me these last 6 months and talking about horse nutrition. It has been a joy to log on and see your face once a month. Tell our listeners where they can pick your brain and where they can find out more about Triple Crown feeds.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Alina. It's been great being here too. And we have to keep these chats up because I want to pick your brain with all the new education you're going to be getting. So
yeah.
So if you have additional questions about your horse's diets, feel free to reach out to Triple Crown, triplecrownfeed.com. We have a Ask the Consultant form there. Or if you call 800-451-9916. I'm Stacy. I'm normally the one that answers there.
All right. Super. And listeners, Stall and Stable will stay. It's going to be around. Our website will be there. We're still offering all sorts of coaching and consulting advice. But all of the episodes, the Triple Crown Nutrition episodes, will be available on your favorite podcast player. They'll be available at Stall and Stable. All of the show notes will remain. So anything that Stacy and I talk about, if you just find the episode show notes, all the links will be there and you can find her. I will continue to be a loyal and happy Triple Crown customer. And I'm going to, in fact, on Friday, get a bag of the functional wafers because I'm going to start using those in my positive reinforcement training. Thank you once again, Stacy, for bringing such positivity and so much knowledge.
Well, thank you again for having me. Take care.
Well, I hope you learned something from this conversation with Stacy. I learned something every time, and it's been a joy, really, to have her here these last 6 months. If you are a horse professional of any kind, whether you own a boarding business, you're a pro rider, you're a trainer, chiropractor, veterinarian, whatever your business may be in the equine industry, I encourage you to reach out to us for some professional help. You're horse people first and business people second, and sometimes those things don't play well together. So when you need help, and we all do, please go to stallandstable.com and click on our business coaching section, where you'll find lots of resources that can help you, whether that's a downloadable guide or booking a coaching session with me or with Buck. If you're looking to finance either the purchase of a farm, a large piece of equipment, perhaps a tractor, an arena drag, or you want to build an indoor arena, any kind of investment that you want to make in your farm or your business usually needs financing. That's okay. That's the sign of a healthy business. In the lending industry, especially business lending, they like to say, borrow the money before you need it. So if you're looking to finance some project on your farm, get in touch with Buck. He can guide you through the process of getting ready to apply for business financing. He can walk you through the application process, get you connected with SBA lenders in your area, and help you avoid some of the common pitfalls when applying for a business loan. Many thanks to everyone who supported the Stall and Stable Show for this long. If you'd like to stay in touch with me, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And that's going to be a wrap for this series. I hope you enjoyed it.